Are you on that page? Or
Okay. We're going on live on Soul Stories.
Hey, we're live.
All right.
Cool. Well, peace everybody in the Facebook world, and for everybody who is dealing with COVID or whatever this thing is that we got going on. This is Shaun the Truth, and I'm the founder of Babytown Production. We're here to have a community dialogue, specifically Black Community Matters. We got my brother here, Danny, and some amazing guests. We got Beverly Grant in the building. We got Femi in the building. Derek McCoy is in the building. We also got Rossina in the building. So, Danny, can you tell us a little bit about Soul Stories Denver?
Yeah, so thanks, Shaun. Soul Stories' whole purpose is to just host difficult conversations through creative expression, dialogue, and storytelling. And yeah, I just feel really grateful that you've put this together. You've organized this incredible crew of humans. And yeah, I'm excited for the conversation to get underway.
Cool. So right now, I want it to be known very early in this dialogue that some of the things that could potentially be said might be heartfelt. Some things might be uncomfortable. Some things might be new. And to our viewers, we just want to honor everybody's individual feelings. This is about growth. This is about humans. This is about being better. And for anybody who's watching right now, we just want to elevate each other. We want this space to be really authentic. And everybody here is authentic in their own way. So that being said, I'm gonna lead us through a meditation exercise so we can get out any potential jitters that we might have. And for anybody that's watching on Facebook Live, I very much would love for you to participate in this as well. So we're gonna start off sitting straight up. If you have a chair or a wall, lean back, relax your shoulders, and just notice your spine. Close your eyes if you're comfortable. Feel your heartbeat. Relax your cheeks. Breathe in through your nose and hold that breath and breathe out through the mouth. We're gonna do 2 more really deep breaths, and they're both gonna start through the nose. So breathe in through the nose. Hold it right in your chest. And release through the mouth. Feel your heartbeat. What's your heart saying right now? Are you guys ready for something a little different? Are you nervous? Whatever it is that you're feeling, that's okay. And we're gonna breathe through the nose, as deep as you can go. Fill your stomach. And breathe out through the mouth. Let your shoulders relax. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes.
We are tired of posting stories and creating hashtags. We are tired of writing articles and making videos. We are tired of having to fight this endless battle just for you to finally see us. What have we done to deserve such hatred? What have we done to be valued so little? Can't you see that we too exist? That our lives are not yours to control? Do you know that we too must breathe? That your hatred is crushing our lungs? What joy do you gain from this? From killing our peers and destroying our families? Can't you see what we bring to this world? Don't you know that without us, you've got nothing at all? The art you cherish was birthed in our arms. The music you've stolen was first sung by our lips. The style you made a trend is none other than the cultures you once despised. The power you always seek, it be at the expense of our lifeless bodies. We are tired of not being heard, despite all the stories we relentlessly share. We are tired of your entitlement, of the stories you feed your own mind to soften the crimes of your kind. What do you stand for? Is it truly freedom or plain oppression? What do you stand for? Is it humanity itself or your own skin color? Check yourself. Check your privileges. We are done begging for our lives. We can no longer let you murder us.
Wow, that was so powerful, Femi.
I love that. Femi,
Yes.
we really appreciate you opening up this space with such a powerful explanation of some of the experiences that are shared amongst people of color. And I'm curious, would you care to elaborate on what made you write that poem?
Yes, of course. So that poem, it came from all of the emotions that I was feeling with everything that's been going on. Like, we have a pandemic going on, and we have people just being killed just because of a skin color. And my mind was just like, my God, we're tired. I am so tired of every day having to say, look at us. We're supposed to be here too. Like, this is our lives that you're taking. And it feels like you don't care about it. And with everything that was going on social media and the videos and the trauma and anxiety, like anger, all of that, it was just boiling up in my body, and I just had to release it. And that poem, I just sat down, and it's literally, I didn't think about it. It's just everything that was coming out from me that just came out in those words. And for me, it was to say kind of enough is enough. Like, we've been talking about this for way too long. When is it going to change? Like, what are we supposed to do? We've talked, we've yelled, we've cried, we've protested, we've marched. People are doing everything. So what is it that we must do to be finally heard and to be finally seen? So it was really just that, the exhaustion of the fatigue and all of that, just getting to the point where you kind of feel hopeless, because it's like, what's left to do? But even though we feel hopeless, we know that we're not going to stop fighting, because this is our lives that we're talking about. And it's not normal that people are being killed, murdered, and just being targeted because they look a certain way. It doesn't make any sense. And it's about time that people finally start listening, because too much, it's too much, it's too much. So yeah, that was that poem's origin. Yeah. Yep.
I feel that. What this is a question for everybody and anybody who wants to answer on the panel. What do you guys think it means to be a listener as it relates to preventing violence?
I can chime in. My name is Derek McCoy. I work with an organization called Project PAVE. And what does it mean to be a listener when it comes to preventing violence? To me, it means hearing those who have not been heard. And when it comes to cultures of violence, unfortunately, those who have been victimized the most frequently, those who have been marginalized into victimizations, are the least heard. And when it comes to racial systems of racism transforming in equitable ways so that we're all honored with dignity and humanity, this is something that I've been pessimistic about, if I'm being honest with you all. And I have not seen any progress really in my lifetime. And I know that might be shocking to some folks who don't bear witness to it. But the reality is, this is not a new reality in our world as people of color. And it's something that we've been pleading for our lives over and over for year after year, decade after decade, century after century. And we have seen very little movement. We've known about police brutality, and we've continued to be the ones that are considered the criminal. So to me, listening is understanding cultures of violence and how certain cultures have narratives and norms that perpetuate violence. But when that dominant culture is perpetuating violence and pointing at the victims as the criminals, and those who are blinded from the victimization do not see that victimization, it's easy for these systems to perpetuate. I deeply believe that the average person who identifies as white, if they didn't have blinders on and they saw what was happening in communities of color all of these years, I think this would have changed. But the reality is systems of oppression are very effective at segregating us physically and segregating the information that we live with as well. So we haven't been heard and we haven't been seen. And I'm very cautiously optimistic right now, to quote a friend over at Denver Health, Jason Matello. I'm very cautiously optimistic about where we're at. I will see actions show louder than words, but I am optimistic right now with the movement of so many quality people, people of all ages. But I really want to honor the young people who are often said to be what's up with that generation. Well, this racial uprising, this transformation, this call for equity from young people of all different colors, shapes, and sizes is what this younger generation is about. So I want to honor them, and I hear you, and I thank you for stepping up for us all because it's needed.
Well, I want to jump in right here and echo a lot of what you're saying, Derek. As an elder, I just want to point out that the youth in every generation have done exactly what you're talking about, you know, starting from way back in my time and beyond to the present day. And what is different about this current time is our intergenerational wounds have been awakened, but also with that, our intergenerational wisdom is there, and that is so vast. And the young people haven't suffered as many wounds as us elders have, and I believe that allows them to hear some things that sometimes become muted when you've lived in systematic, invisible structures that perpetuate racism for generations. You know, because they're not doing things that are against the law, okay? And we haven't ever, there's no period in our American history where we have existed without the conditions that still exist. How about that? At no particular time. But what is happening is the solidarity of our community is eroding generation to generation because it succumbs to these institutional traps and snares that exist in school, in employment, in just walking around and driving while Black or brown or different. So listening, you know, it includes keen observation, because that's why you're listening. You know, you're listening and you're also watching, and you're taking it in, and you're being quiet so that, you know, you're not just knee jerking your way. You're being methodical about the steps you take. And this is also what we're seeing. This is also what we're seeing. So I'm gonna pass the baton to someone else to say more behind me.
Okay. I definitely feel that generational point. I think when we really consider the different ways in which we have needed to organize, it's a very complex idea. And one thing I noticed, because I live kind of close to downtown, and at one point there was a youth-led rally, and there was an elder in the community that felt disrespected because the youth wanted to acknowledge that there's a type of energy that they are feeling, and they want people in society to hear them, kind of what Derek was talking about earlier. And yet an elder in the crowd was like, but you don't realize we've been doing so much work historically. And that lack of respect, or lack of understanding, more so than respect probably, that's the thing that can make my heart kind of cringe a little bit, because I'm like, dude, of course the generations before did amazing things, and yet when it's the elders' turn to talk, that has to be respected when it's their turn to talk. And for the young people, it's like it's vice versa. If they have something they need to say, or if they need to listen, they can actually learn how to make the movement better. So when I think about violence as it relates to listening, I'm wondering, how do we prevent violence to begin with? And I want to direct this question in particular to Derek, but how do you define violence prevention?
So when it comes to violence prevention, I just want to point out that this is sort of an archetypical approach to education. And I don't do the work to prevent violence. I do the work to prevent healthy expressions of humanity and to promote healthy relationships. And to me, if we're working to not have something happen, we often perpetuate that thing happening because we're spending so much time reflecting on that and having awareness, right? And I do believe that there needs to be awareness of our struggle, and we need to learn how to heal from that and not perpetuate those cycles. I think we need to spend a lot more time, though, practicing what those healthy relationship skills are, and what those healthy expressions of self are. Because when you look at cultures of violence, and in the field, we're hyper aware that, perspectives create the behaviors, right? And we spend too much time punishing and interrupting behaviors rather than interrupting and offering a counter narrative for these perspectives. So to me, violence prevention is recognizing and owning the fact that the dominant culture is a violent culture. It has been before the origins of this country and all the way through our experience in this experiment called the United States of America. It is a violent and domineering culture. And that's the truth. We have to look right at the truth and say, this is what it is. And here's what our values attest to, right? And there is this contradiction between what we attest our values are and what our actual collective behaviors are. So we need to look at that. In the middle is where we kind of make that space for transformation. And that to me is where violence transforms into peaceful communities, is recognizing, you know, what role we play in that. And that's why I circle back to that same point I made earlier, is that those who have been victimized by this dominant white culture have been given the label criminal. That's a gap. People who identify as white bringing people of dark skin to this country was a gruesomely violent feat. People were jumping into the ocean that they couldn't swim in because it would be better to die for some than to be enslaved. And I saw a quote from Toni Morrison recently, and she basically said, to, you know, mesh with this dominant narrative kind of conversation, what would those who identify as white, what would they have without race? What would you be if you didn't have this white thing to cling to? Would you be free? Would you be human? What would you be? And that quote is coming from decades ago, right? And it's freshly relevant still to this day. So I don't believe really that, you know, violence prevention is the way. I believe that humanizing ourselves and our relationship is the way.
Derek, if I can ask a follow-up question to that. There was a lot there to unpack, so forgive me if I can't get my thoughts out, but how do you see that, like, current dominant violent narrative, like, continuing to play out and particularly expressing itself through individuals you work with? And maybe even plug a little bit about the work you do with that.
Well, that dominant narrative plays out not just in the police, right? It plays out in the way that we express our humanity. And if you look at masculine culture, most acts of violence are spewing out of the masculine culture, right? So how do I see that playing out is this subconscious reflex that we're all sort of expected to conform to. I always say that as guys, we're taught to shut up with our emotions and fight with our fists, right? Now, how that plays out on a societal level is, well, if I act out, there's a cage for me, right? That's going to happen. I'm going to find myself school to prison pipeline, work to prison pipeline, whatever it is, right? But there's institutions where that masculine dominance is legal, back to Beverly's point, where that has been, you know, a weapon of the state. And understanding that, you know, policing started in this country out of slave patrol, which basically empowered people with lighter skin who identify as white, who had the same exact power level in this country as people who were enslaved. And when slavery shifted with the 13th Amendment to be, well, we can enslave those who are criminalized, well, that became the criminalization of dark-skinned people. And those who identify as white, who had the same power level, now get to police over those who are perceived as black or dark skinned, right? So this ingrained subconscious entitlement that Femi mentioned in her poem is something that's deeply subconscious. And the goal of healthy relationship promotion or violence prevention work is to bring that subconscious conditioning to the conscious, to be reevaluated. So how I see this playing out with people that we work with, whether they be young or old, is there's a lot of subconscious unawareness, right? We are socialized and wired in ways that we're unaware of. So these subconscious lack of awareness lead to perpetuating cycles of violence. And the goal is to help people recognize the deficit that we're at by perpetuating these cycles and offer a counter narrative that's generated by us rather than this forced narrative that's thrust down upon us from birth. Because that same narrative of black and white is thrust on the white people as well, right? And I don't believe that we are white and black. These aren't even colors. If I look around, like even on this call, Danny, I don't know how you identify, but you are not the colorless white, right? If I could pull out my cup. That's not Danny's skin color. That's not the light-skinned half of my family as a person that has Anglo on one side and African on the other side. This is not my dad's skin color. And he's pretty dark-skinned too. But we've framed these constructs in a hierarchy that you're born into self-hate being taught that black is left. You're born into self-entitlement being taught subconsciously that white is superior to black. And this shows up, and I don't get a lot of solidarity with this point, but this shows up in our religious institutions as well. The framing of light and dark. Look at my eyes. There is nothing without balance. There's white around it. There's black in the middle. Why are we framing light and dark as good and evil? Evil happens in the light. I saw it with Ahmaud Arbery, right? Beautiful things happen in the night. Beautiful things happen in the light. Why are we framing it in this binary simplicity that subconsciously causes us to perpetuate all of these dynamics over and over again? And I don't know that I did a fair job of answering that question, but that's my piece.
I think you answered that question and a million more questions. Thanks for sharing that, Derek. That was really powerful. And I think there's a lot to, yeah, as I said, unpack there. If we can transition back to Femi, Femi, would you mind introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about yourself, and then we have a couple questions for you?
Yes, I can. Sorry, that face was because I heard a noise. It wasn't what you were saying. Like I just heard a crazy.
It was well timed.
So my name is Olufemi Nassi, but I go by Femi. I am from the Republic of Benin, which is a small country in West Africa. It's right next to Nigeria because nobody ever knows where it is. But I came to the US almost 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years in August. And no, it's really when I got here that I learned that I was a Black person. Like back home, I was just Femi, you know, everybody looks like me. There's nothing about it. Of course, we had the whole light skin versus dark skin thing, and it created its own thing. But it's really when I got here that I was like, oh, okay, so this is the first thing people are going to see about me. And that was just like, it was actually the day of my birthday, my first birthday here, that thing really got to me. And it was a moment of realization. And I was like, okay, so this is your reality now. You cannot run away from it. It's gonna happen. And as time went by, I went through all of the stages, you know, like paranoia, like anger, and like anxiety and fear. And now I have a 12-year-old, my little brother who's living with me. And with everything that's been going on mentally, it was just like, God, what's going on in this place? Like, this is crazy. And, you know, when I came here, I went through many things that as an African, a woman, everything, like people don't always tell you about those things. So it's just going through life, you know. And back home, many people believe that the US it's heaven on earth. It's the El Dorado. You don't have any problem. You do not have to struggle to make things work. So with a friend of mine who is in Canada, we decided to write our stories and publish our first book. So that book is titled Chisoke, which means awakening, because for us coming here was a matter of awakening. You know, I learned about my culture. I learned about the value of my skin tone, of being a woman, of the importance of mental health, because back there it is still very taboo. Like in Black communities in general, it's already taboo, but over there, it's because it is so far away, it's always white people thing. We don't talk about that. You're a strong man, you're a strong woman, you know, shake it off, all of that. And I faced depression when I came here. I cannot tell how many times I just looked at my wall and I was like, well, you look kind of good today. I'm just gonna run to you and knock myself up and like sleep until tomorrow. But I didn't do that. Don't worry. I was good. I stayed strong. But I wrote about all of those things, and I wrote about the experience of questioning everything that like I had learned. because there's so much social construct, there's so many things that society tells us. You're a girl, you gotta do this. You're Black, you gotta do that. You're this, you gotta do that. And I got to the point where I was like, okay, let's back up. Who are you if you take all those labels out? Like, what do you believe in, and why do you believe in those things? So that was my journey, and I wrote that book not really because I wanted to be a writer, but because I wanted to help other people who are going through the same experience and let them know that, hey, it's okay to go through this, and it's all right, and many of us go through it, and if I was able to do it, then you can do that as well. And also to just create kind of like a support for them and let them know that, hey, you're not alone. And then like that was the book. And in 2018 I started doing poetry. I wanted to try something different. And some of the things that really matter to me, and some of the things I really talk a lot about, are, mental health, personal, cultural identity, and self-awareness. I believe that it is very important to look within, to reflect on ourselves, on our lives, on our choices, like the experiences that led us there, in order to be better. Because you can't be like just dragging all of that emotional baggage and wanting life to be all good. At some point you're gonna have to face your realities and face your demons, or else you're just gonna go down there, and then you're gonna blame life. But and I think it's something, especially in Black or slash African communities, we lack. And more importantly with our men, because we put so much pressure on them to be this strong Black people. The Black man, he's always this. And then this other idea of the strong Black woman who, she's got it all, she can do this, she has the kids, she has the job. But we forget that they're human beings, and they need time to sit, to acknowledge their feelings, to face their traumas in order to get better. So that's also like, I wrote my book and I do the poetry, but right now what is very dear to me is my podcast that I launched in March. And I wanted to have that platform so people like me, like you, anybody really can come and share their story about anything. Like, it's not just, it's really people talking about their own journey from who I was, what happened to me, and who I am now. Like deconstructing some of the things that we were taught, like Black men coming and talking about mental health, African and coming to talk about mental health, defining what the self is to everybody and why it matters. So for me, all of that is really important in order to first realize that nothing is white or Black. Like, there's so much gray space, and we tend to put everything in this box and forget that as human beings, that's just not possible. There's always so many factors happening, whether it is with race, with gender, with sexuality, mental health, all of that. But we forget that things are very unique depending on who you are, your background, and all of that. And me, I just wanted to create that platform to let people know that, hey, you come here, you can be vulnerable. That's what I want to see, because I believe that it is through your vulnerability that you can get to the stage where you're comfortable with yourself and you're at peace with yourself. So that was a long answer, but yeah, that's it. That's me. Right now, anyways, we're gonna add more stuff later.
I appreciate you touching on some of Derek's themes too, of just like these forced binaries and how that's not the reality. Or I mean, it is the reality, and it doesn't have to be, I guess.
Yeah.
And also, I've heard you perform your. Let me see if I can say this right. G's okay. Soke.
G. Soke.
Soke.
Yes.
Well, check that out if you're listening. Femi has an incredible way with words, and I'm excited to check out your episode with Najat on your podcast as well. And I guess the question I have for you is, you talked a little bit about this at the beginning, and I've heard you describe yourself as an in-betweener. And I'm curious how because you talked about like being labeled Black when you came to this country.
Mhm.
How has that experience, that in-betweener identity, impacted your perspective on racism in America?
Mm, that's a great one. I love that. So first of all, let me probably explain a little bit that whole in-betweener thing, because I know more people are like, what does that mean? So throughout my whole life, I've always been this kind of girl who's, I'm a tomboy, but I'm also very girly. And I am, I am African, but I live in the American culture. So I have a little bit of that. And I can be like all feminine. And then the next day people ask me, are you a boy? And there's just so many things that like I have the time. I'm an extrovert. Like I love to talk, but there are times when I'd rather just stay in my corner, don't bother me, nothing. And so for people, it's like you're a mess. But for me, it's just I have many sides of who I am. It's not just Femi this or Femi that. It's like all of those things together that make Femi. And I'm not going to choose because this is how I love to be. And so like before coming here, the concept of race, it was really like a distant thing, distance, very distant. I came here when I was 19 years old, and at that time, like especially back home, and that was what, like 5 years ago, it was it wasn't really there. We hear about it and we see the consequences, but we never really realized that, oh, okay, this is what's going on. But then I came here, and what's funny, the experience that actually made me realize that, oh, you're Black, it was so subtle that sometimes I still ask myself if it's really a thing. Like basically, it was the day of my birthday. I went to this event with my stepdad, who is white, and we went there, and I was probably the only Black person, and there were like 50 other people. First of all, that was really weird because I came from a place where everybody looks like me, and then I have a bunch of people who don't look like me. And there was this lady who sat right in front of me, and she started staring at me. I mean, it's not really a thing, but the way she was just looking at me, very insistent, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I felt like I was not in my place and I had to leave. I literally was fighting tears at that moment, and I was just like, hey Dad, can you take me home, because this is weird. And I didn't tell him that it was that, which is also a problem, because it's like, I don't want to start explaining how I feel and why I feel like this because someone looked at me. And so I got home and I sat down and I was like, oh, okay, this is the thing now. And so after that, I think it's at that moment that I started realizing and seeing all of the different level of racism and how it appears in society, the systemic, the people wanting, not even trying to pronounce my name in classes, being the girl who represents the whole Black culture and the whole Black identity and all of those little things. And I think I forgot your initial question. I talked a lot. What was the thing I was supposed to answer? Tell me just because I started talking, I forgot. Jesus.
No, you're right on track.
Oh,
Just
okay, cool.
your identity has impacted your view on racism in America.
Okay, yes. So eventually, that is a tough one. Like, how did it impact it? I think now I see a lot of perspective about it all, because when the murder of George Floyd happened, I had a friend from back home who texted me and asked me, is this real? Like, she was genuinely curious and she was genuinely surprised as with everything that was happening, because she was like, many people think that Black Americans are exaggerating. They're always talking about race this, race that. Like, come on, guys, when are you going to change? But because over there, they don't see that. And so for them, it's very this like weird concept. They know it exists, but it's like, you guys are doing too much. So for me, it's being able to kind of like become a bridge and tell those who are back home that, hey, what you're going through, look, we're Black, yes, but you're Black in Benin, in Africa, is not the same as Black in America. It is different. So for me, it's being able to like look at different perspective and see really why people might see it this way instead of that way. And so I try to really create that bridge and create those stories that will help people see things differently. And the podcast name is actually In Betweeners, because I believe it is people who are not just stopped in one idea or concept about something, but who are trying to understand more of it. So for me, it's also like you're always learning about this stuff. It's never ending. Like one day you discover another layer, and the next day you think about something you learned before, and it's I think it's just a journey right now, and like it's really about seeing many layers to that whole race thing, because it's so hard to even just define. It's yeah. Yes, I don't know if I answered, but I tried,
Femi,
tried.
I think what I love is that you're helping people tell their stories, and I feel like anybody who can assist somebody with getting their story out to the universe, like that's like, anytime I can feel as if I'm being included in something, that's the work to me. That's the resistance that we really need in the world. And doing it on a podcast, I feel as if, where has this been? You know what I mean? Like, but at the same time, it's here now, and people like yourself are doing that work. And that being said, I want to transition a little bit to Rossina, because I know Rossina in a way that I don't even know if I would be in this position if I hadn't gone through her services. I worked with one of the therapists within her organization, but Rossina, I'm hoping that you can tell us a little bit more about your work, and then we're going to have a few questions for you.
Yes. Hello. And so, so Rossina Schroeer-Santiago, that's a mouthful. I'm the founder of the Therapist of Color Collaborative. So we are the first and only collaborative of mental health therapists here in Colorado. I dare to say probably nationwide. And so it may be a movement at this juncture. But the collaborative for me, when I think about why it came together, and I did a talk a little over a week ago now, mental health itself for me, like being in this position, like being able to be a provider of these services and be with people in such a delicate time such as now, right? I look at like all of my experience and the access that I've been able to do. And for me, this profession is my social responsibility. Right. And it's my social responsibility because I was able to have access and privilege, right, to be able to go get a higher level of education and to be able to take what I synthesize there and digest it through my filter, right? So I'm Afro-Latina, and digest it through my filter and be able to bring it back into my community in such a way that it makes sense, right? Like everything that I was taught, all this Western standardized stuff was done and written into books based off of people who don't look like us. And so for me, it's like, it's my social responsibility, because as a profession in mental health, I had looked at some numbers. So as of 2019, mental health professional, when it comes to Black, Indigenous, person of color, we only occupy about 18% of the total profession nationwide. And that means that the other 82%, right, are non-persons of color that are doing this work. And so that's where I think, the social responsibility comes in, because I have to be able to put my face out in this space to let my community know. And not only that, like the younger ones that are coming up. And I mean, I am so just like amazed by the work of, these young millennials and even younger, right? Because, it's kids that are teenagers, right, that are out there doing this and wanting to impact, a movement that's demanding so much of our attention right now, and it's demanding change. But I think where mental health enters in is mental health is what makes social justice, right? It is what creates and impacts and gets us to critically reflect on socioeconomic factors that impact our communities of color. it makes us look at the implications of like how that impacts our community so deeply, and you know how access to services and how equity in being able to create this access is determined. And so by doing this work in my collaborative, when I formed it, you know, it was twofold. I think anytime that you do this work, when I think of just how we move and the work that's done, right? We can make a ripple with one drop, but when it's many drops, we can make a wave, right? And so one, our power and our strength comes collectively, right? And so having many therapists in this collaborative creates a space where people don't have to fight to look for access, right? They just have to turn to a space. And even if it's not within my collaborative, right, because I don't house all the therapists of color in Colorado yet, right? No, just kidding. But you know, it's a central place where other therapists of color can find community, right? And when we have community, I think it lightens the burden of this load, because it's a lot of emotional labor, I think, as a mental health provider right now to hold this. And it's very interesting sometimes, you know, having my clients ask, like, well, how are you? And it's like, you know, if I'm being honest, it's a lot of emotional labor. But, you know, I also have to filter through the fact that, you know, if my clients are asking me this question, how is what I'm going to answer going to benefit them, right? And so as a mental health professional, like, I take very seriously my role. And I think as a profession of, you know, the profession of mental health, we are at a point where we should be spearheading this, right? Because we have the understanding of the human condition to be able to bridge some of those gaps, bridge some of that understanding, and really promote very meaningful ways of how we sit here and say, like, this is how this work can be done, right? And we have the opportunity to be innovative and to be able to create something that is sustainable. And I always get really cautious with the word healing, right? You know, we say sometimes in the mental health profession, you have to feel before you can heal. But sometimes I think when we look at the word heal, we look at it as a one and done, a set it and forget it. And healing is not that, right? Like, healing is a process, which is why it remains in that ing, and it's an ongoing thing. And it means that it's so important for you to be actively doing your work. And going back to that listener question, like when you said that earlier, listening, right? And being able to be a listener in this process means I am so very richly and deeply being an active participant in a process that you're moving through. And by being an active participant, it means that I don't get to sit idly by. It means I'm sitting here with you in the quest of either solutions or, you know, needs or, you know, supports, or however I can be there, right? And it's a responsibility, right, to be so deeply in that experience and hold that space, like, so humbly and even nobly, right? Because it's a very gentle space when somebody invites you in there. And to Femi's point, when you said vulnerability, you know, vulnerability is the most courageous thing that we can do, but it's oftentimes the very last thing that we give ourselves permission to do, because we have these constructs of what, like, being vulnerable means, you know, especially in communities of color. Like, if you're being vulnerable, you weak, you soft, you know, you can't do this, right? And, you know, those different stereotypes and things that we exist in, you know, it definitely, being able to break a little bit of those misconceptions, I think, is probably some of the most rewarding thing being a therapist of color is. And so, you know, for me, it's social responsibility, because it's what promotes social change, and it's what advances our efforts in social justice and really changing things for our communities of color.
With that. that love right there, because when I think about healing, it just kind of comes and goes. You know, some days I feel great. Last week I lost a friend, and it just I fell off for the whole week, and I wasn't able to function. And Derek has seen me in times where I haven't been able to function at Project PAVE, and it's just like it is so important to me that we remove the stigma around seeking support, because half the time I just didn't want to ask for support, and then it almost felt like I would be accused of having emotions and being somebody who actually feels everything that I go through.
Mhm.
So I would love if you could speak a little bit on the stigma that people of color, especially within the Black community, go through, and why do you feel that stigma exists?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at just like mental health in general, right? Like, one, just by the sheer numbers of those of us who are professionals of color in this profession, and when we look back historically, those who have been historically able to access it, right? It's been a matter of who could access it to be able to get these services, which typically didn't lie in communities of color. And going to Derek's point is that, we typically went into the churches and things like that. And so it's like, baby, just go pray about it, right? Go take it to Jesus, leave it on the pulpit. And, and now we're saying, with having these spaces where more of us as therapists of color are coming into this space where we're like, well, yes, you can have Jesus and a therapist. And we're challenging a little bit of that narrative, right? Because it's not just, and it comes from the faith sometimes, and I very much identify as a faith-driven individual, but sometimes those structures are very rigid, and most of the people in those spaces don't necessarily have mental health training, right? And so they're sitting here counseling and giving those things, and they don't have like the formal education to, work with some of that. And then the other part is when we think just the stigma behind it is that, it was a luxury to be able to seek mental health. And when we go back, even as far as like, not necessarily like as far back as slavery, but when we think of when we came out of that era, that luxury to tend to ourselves in a way that was nurturing and for the betterment of our own individual person, that wasn't something color had the luxury of doing. I look back on my roots movement, my Mexican side, and so the Chav Suerta and Corky Rodolfo and movement that happened here, and what that looked like to be able to say like, oh, go get you some mental health when you're in the midst of this movement, and you have to act, you have to respond. And so to sit back and take that time to take care of yourself, some of that stigma said, well, you're selfish, because if you're taking care of you, then how can you take care of the other people who need you? Right. And so if you're looking at it in terms of, well, I can't do it because if I do, it makes me selfish, want to self-centered or have that, right? Or the other part of it is, well, if I give this to myself, now am I saying like I'm uppity or I'm bougie or whatever because I cared enough about myself to do these? Um, and it's just looking at all the different like just cultural and societal contexts in which mental health itself just even exists in. And that's why I talk about it in terms of like social justice, because we have to look at the macro systems, right? Like it's the macro systems in which all of these different systemic forms of oppression exist. And a lot of it, right? So mental health exists in the healthcare platform. Well, we know healthcare itself is a big systemic structure that promotes a lot of oppression within communities of color because, it inhibits our ability to access things in an equitable way, right? When we're looking at services that are delivered, oftentimes in communities of color, they're not delivered in the same fashion. It's given the generic brand or the off brand or the newer people who need some experience. And so they send the residents to come get their experience in our communities and do the experiments. And, and we're not getting the same quality of care, right? The other part is it's saying, some of those stigmas, it's that those stigmas don't promote that critical reflection on like the issues of race that we have to, and how we challenge the narrative of power and privilege, right? The narrative of power and privilege also is the thing I think that promotes a lot of how people are looking at accessing services when it comes to mental health in communities of color. Because if somehow you're accessing these things, it's saying, oh, well, I do have a certain privilege. But if you have this privilege, is this saying that, you're no longer a part of community, or does this somehow revoke your credibility, right? Because you've gone to access these services and wanted to do better and different for yourself. And so when we look at that, I think it's really important that we allow space to say, it doesn't have to be done the way that it's always been done. Because if we continue to do things the same way, how can we ever expect the change that we desire to happen in the future? And so we have to be willing to give permission and even challenge that narrative, right? I always ask my clients, well, why not you, right? Why don't you feel that you deserve these things? And when it comes into this space of mental health, I loved how you were just so open and so raw with how, your own experience has been, Shaun. And that is kind of therapy. You're going to have peaks, you're going to have lows. And the hope is that we can get you to those plateaus so that way you can feel rooted in it and you can take that back and share your story. And so even just by you like doing this and being that voice and being open and sharing that, those are the things that contribute to how we break down the stigma of mental health in our communities of color. Because if we're making it something that other people can see as possible as doing, they too then begin to believe that they can access those things for themselves. And so it's a giving of that permission to be able to tell people, you deserve to have this space and this healing and this goodness and these loving kindnesses, and you deserve to be able to give those to yourself and those around you, right? And so there's my soapbox.
That was amazing. Is it pronounced Rossina?
Yes.
Rossina. Well, I really appreciate what you're sharing, and just I feel very educated just listening to, or I feel like I learned a lot just listening to like all like your thoughtful just descriptions of like how these barriers came to be created within mental health. I work at a residential facility for kids who have been through trauma and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now we're reckoning with like our leadership is completely white and female. And our executive director talked today, like, I think I've failed because our leadership looks exactly like me. And so I know for our company, like, it's like, how do we break down the racism that's inherent in the structure that's been created within our own mental health facility?
Absolutely. And some of what you're saying there, it also speaks to a term that's even just so just like wildfire in our profession. We talk about these terms of competency. And when we speak in terms of competency, I might be dating myself, and I'm not as young as I may look, but the easy bake oven, right? So the easy bake oven is way back in the day, but it was little, you made this little cake, you put in this little microwave oven, you set that thing, and you forgot about it. And competency, when it comes to mental health, we go through our graduate programs and we get this education. It's like, oh, well, if you have these competencies, you must know. Right. And so I think the thing in agencies is like they train to competencies, but they never train to responsivity or, inclusivity. Right. And so if we're just learning competencies, we're saying, well, now you know everything that you need to know. Well, as an Afro-Latina, you can't go read about me in a book. And so, and you're not going to be competent by reading a book, because I'm pretty complex little something. And I'm okay with that. But you won't read about me in a book. And so when we say that our competencies come from it, yes, it's a framework and structure, but I think as a profession, we have to learn to be, you know, my peers who aren't persons of color, they have to be culturally humble and they have to be culturally responsive. And sometimes, you know, the thing with, you know, competencies does promote an element of power, and it creates a power, an inherent power dynamic within the, you know, the counseling relationship. And until like we challenge that, which is part of the work of the collaborative, is, you know, I want to be able to go work with my peers who are not persons of color and say, I need you to step outside of that box, and I need you to understand the importance of how you appreciate race in this therapeutic relationship, because race is how it's our first cultural orientation. You know, even from career and how we navigate the world, we orient ourselves to people who have similar, who look similar to us, who do similar things to us, who talk similar to us. It's just our inherent like connection to things. And so if we're orienting by this first, we have to have an appreciation for what that looks like. But we can't say it's, you know, just saying competency. It has to be through humility, inclusivity, and responsivity. And those are just really big three for me.
I really appreciate that. And I think humility, I agree, humility is super important. I could go on and on about like how what I see at my workplace and the microaggressions, and I'm happy that our agency is willing to take a tiny step forward, and I hope that brings about some change, at least within our culture. And just to transition a little bit, I want to bring Beverly into our conversation. Beverly, would you mind introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about who you are, and we'll have some questions for you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight to participate in this conversation. My work for the past 10 years has been about inspiring people to understand what this notion of health really means. Everything we've been talking about tonight is the definition of health. So we've talked about mental health, emotional health, physical health. We've talked about financial health and relational dynamics. All of these components equal health. Health isn't just these checkpoints that we go to the doctor, you know, say, oh yeah, your heart's good, this and that. That our health is a combination of all these things. And food is our foundation. Food is really what food work and food justice has encapsulated what I've been doing the past 10 years. So I suppose I'll let your questions, you know, guide more about that.
I feel that. And I know I've actually been hyping you up the last couple of days, Bev. I've just been reaching out to different people, letting them know a little bit about your work. So I have this thing about food, and it took me a while, but I recognized in college something just in my system was like, dude, McDonald's is a no-go. Burger King is a no-go. And it was just like the list just kind of went on, and I was just like, I don't know what this is, but it came from within me. And I want your thoughts about what is the role of food as it relates to resistance? Because for me, every time I thought about just how simple it was for me to make that decision, I know it's not easy for everybody. And at the same time, it was very empowering for me to be like, yo, on Thanksgiving, I got to dodge the turkey. You know what I mean? Or I'm little by little dodging things that I was taught to eat all my life. You know, I loved eating bacon and I loved eating certain things, but food became a little bit more dear to me. So I wonder, what are your thoughts on the role of food as a resistance mechanism?
Well, I love this approach. My first response is food is our first line of defense, period. None of us walking around can even function if we don't consume some food. Now, some of us are not clear really on what food is because of socialization, savvy marketing, the creation of food deserts, and this divide of the have and the have-nots. It is perpetuated in every sphere that we can imagine. And when it comes to food, it's really a shame how this plays out. Now, many of our, well, first, let me start here that our heritage, we all come from the legacy of consuming organic food because that's all there was to consume. And through man's savviness, the marriage of science into doing different things, now we have food products. So when you're going to McDonald's, when you're opening packages, utilizing microwave magic, those are products. And those create a low energy vibration within us. And so, our natural systems are like, what the heck was this? What just happened here? And over time, we keep introducing that into our systems, and it begins to shift our vibrations where we form addictions to sugar, alcohol, different imbalances. We have emotional upset and unrest in our daily lives. So we run to food for comfort. And we don't have stress management coping skills always because we're living in a trial by fire circumstance, or we never seem to have enough resources in our day-to-day lives. And so our food options take the hit. Like we start figuring out our bills, the things that we got to pay. And then next thing you know, I got $20 to eat on for the month or something ridiculous like that. And so this is how we fall into developing unhealthy habits, which if we are what we eat, and we are, and we are consuming horrible things that we don't realize are horrible, over time, it does jade our mental outlook. It will take our energy level and bring it down. We can feel angry and anxious and all of these things, diabetes, the things that we are the poster children for, diabetes, cardiac, pulmonary, obesity, you know, these are from disruptions in our ability to eat quality foods, which are our building blocks, coupled with high stress because something may be going on in employment or education, lack of access to healthcare. And let me segue to say that when we connect and rebuild a relationship to food, then we have really we have begun to heal ourselves from the inside out. Our bodies are regenerative, and we're made up of a series of systems, from our nervous system, our the system that governs our breathing. We have a myriad of systems that govern us, and the inputs that we're eating break down and support those things. Now, in today's time, people are more and more interested in growing their own food or accessing freshly grown foods. See, that's the beginning point of a resistance movement personally. When you feel those inklings that I want to do better, I want to eat better, and you're willing to try, that's the beginning of your resistance movement. And then you build strength as you disengage, like any resistance, from the terrible habits we may have had to replacing them with more healthy things. Now, we need a mentor to do that sometimes. We try these different things like making green smoothies and juicing, and we're like, oh my God, that was horrible. It tastes like grass. Well, that removes the motivation to keep going. And so, what I say is to remove all that pressure, we focus one meal at a time, one bite and one sip at a time. And it's way easier than we think. It will be amazing to you to learn how you've been socialized into thinking certain things because you see commercials over and over, you hear sound bites, commercials and things, and these things constantly influence us. We get random notifications about things. Um, you know, we're bombarded around this. And so when we slow things down, disengage from a lot of the mainstream things, then we're able to hear our voices, reconnect with that energy that's already there because we inherited it. Um, we were born and we are born to be stewards of the earth, but we're disconnected from that relationship because of our socialized lifestyles. I really could relate to what, let's see, Olive Femi was saying earlier about how when she became immersed in our American culture, how suddenly she had these terrible awakenings and she was becoming privy to the constructs that were born into. And so then when I listened to Sister Rossina about, you know, I want to be an example of a beacon of stress management, coping skills, strength, and self love. And I want to do it for the people that look like me because it takes us to motivate us, to relate to us. And so that has been my mission over my 10 years of existence to meet heal practitioners of all kinds, people that specialize in healthy eating, nutritionists, active living folk, mental health people. It takes all of that to really address the needs that we have. I think I'll stop there and let you redirect me.
I very much agree, especially when I think about it takes all of us, because when I process this concept of a food desert, that took me a while to really understand on a systematic level how that works. And then as I look back at neighborhoods that I grew up in Montbello and Green Valley, I don't have a whole lot of memories digging in the dirt whatsoever. And
you got to understand that food deserts are constructs that were created. Okay, they were created. And like the neighborhoods I live in East Denver, like Park Hill, the Five Points neighborhoods, they didn't start out as food deserts like they are now. They were turned into food deserts, strategically through policy, and civic planning. It's not accidental that there are food deserts in all 50 states. It blew my mind that why would Hawaii have a food desert? But, everywhere, every state. So that points to policy that has, been allowed to be implemented, from like a template type of approach. And then things are funded or not funded according to that. Now, gentrification has also brought to bear about the injustice of how neighborhoods have been created and exist, and only because that economic engine has come into a neighborhood is there being some conversation around it. What some of this realization is that some food deserts cannot be undone because there's not land to develop to bring food infrastructure in. So this is why it is important for us to be a part of our own food and health solution. And we can start doing that by growing a little food at home or supporting someone that wants to grow. Not everyone wants to grow. So I don't advocate you doing it if you don't feel it. But I do want to encourage you to seek out freshly grown foods, know the origins of where your food comes from, which will take you out of the store. A form of resistance is like never going to the store to buy food. If you grew food or supported farms, things like this were to keep you out of the stores, that's a form of resistance. You are increasing your health exponentially because the product that you are eating, is filled with integrity, and not chemicals. It's filled with love, and not chemicals and fertilizers and growth hormones. And I wanted to go back to what you said about like eating turkey and bacon. Now, the food of, say, 30, 40 years ago is not the food of today. So meats and things that now we absolutely better watch, we didn't have to do that to the degree we're doing it now because the practices under which these items are produced and created, it was done with integrity and done in partnership with nature. Now we got crazy things going on in our agricultural world, and without taking all that on, trying to learn all that, disengaging is our form of resistance.
Well, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that tip to stay out of the stores. I know that's really challenging for myself, and I'm sure a lot of people, but it's definitely something that I think people can really work for. Beverly, maybe whenever you get back or you have a chance, I'd love if you could just plug Mo Better Greens Marketplace and just the work you do in the community, because it's really inspiring. And we are looking at doing some audience questions. So this is for everybody. Thank you all for just giving each other space and listening. This has been so fucking powerful. I have so much to think about and talk about, and I hope it's inspiring conversations. I know people on our Facebook Live, there's lots of applause, clapping hands, lots of people saying truth. So you have a lot of support. And this has been one of our biggest viewed streams so far. So hats off to everyone here. Question from, I don't think I'm going to say this right, but Sanich A. Ramsey. The question is, what daily actions can be done to bring the subconscious to conscious? And what daily actions support the fight? I think this was asked when you were speaking, Derek, earlier.
Okay, so Ms. Rossina and Ms. Beverly answered those questions perfectly, I think, in everything they said, with ultimately just being critically aware. And I think the term that Rossina used was critical reflection around our choices, right? Like, why do I go for that food choice? Why do I make this decision? Why do I view this right or wrong? But the one that I really like to resonate with is our emotional content. What emotions have you been socialized to have a stigma towards? What emotions have you learned to glorify? This sort of attachment and aversion to reference a Buddhist concept really doesn't teach us how to be embracing of our whole spectrum of emotions. And to me, that's something that I continue to do. I didn't realize till I started doing this work that I had been socialized so subconsciously by the masculine culture that I could not ask for help, literally. And it took me till I was 27 years old to realize that about myself. So I had to push back on that when I recognized that tendency to, like, you know, man up and avoid asking for help, because the reality is I was wasting a lot of time. I am not good at everything. And there's people on this call with me that are great at certain things that I am not very good at. So rather than try and figure this out and make this will on my own, I could go call Miss Rossina, right? So just recognizing our tendencies and studying them. Why do I make choices like this? And I'd love to hear what others have to say, but I do think Rossina and Beverly answered that question perfectly after it was asked.
If I can jump in real quick, I think for me personally, it's being mindful, and it's something I'm trying to work on, like on a daily basis. I think that sitting down and really being present in every moment and asking yourself, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I not doing that? And it's something that like I would do mindfulness meditation, but I think sometimes we just limit it to when we're sitting down for 10 minutes to think about this, but it should be something that's going on pretty much all the time, because sometimes we just go on with the flow without even realizing why we're doing it. And later we have to face the consequences, but we don't even know what actually triggered it because we weren't mentally present at that moment. So I think for me, and that's something that I promote with my platform, is really being mindful and analyzing and looking at things the way they are. I know that sometimes by doing that, we can eventually tend to overthink everything that we do. I have that problem, but sometimes it's by getting to those two extremes that you can figure out the right balance for yourself. And so, yeah, that's my answer.
I want to add to what you're saying, Femi, and that, you know, when we talk about mindfulness and mental health, you know, the thing with mindfulness, it's not just like, you know, mindful, right? So putting so much stuff in your mind that it's just overwhelmed and overworked. What mindfulness really is giving yourself that patience to be so very present and just engulf yourself with your own experience, but to do so like in the present moment, like right here, right in the now. And the other part is without judgment, right? Because the biggest part with mindfulness is, you know, we like to think, oh, well, okay, I'll just sit here and meditate. And then we're like, gosh, I'm sitting here wasting my time, or I should have done this, I should have done that, and wrapping ourselves up all in the shoulds. And we say, don't be shoulding all over yourself, because it gets you caught up in a narrative that'll just have your wheels spun out. And so mindfulness, right? It's a very intentional act, and it's something that you give yourself, and it's something that nourishes like your spirit, your emotional being. And I like to remind my folks is that, you know, our mental and emotional health is with us just as long as our physical health, right? We were born with it, right? But we tend to the exterior because it's the facade that we get to put out there and broadcast to the world. But if your structure on the inside is not sustained and it's not stable, it's all going to crumble in front of the eyes of everybody. So you got to tend to your emotional and mental wellness just as much as your physical wellness, because you need them both. You need them both to be sustained.
I just want to piggyback real quick too, because I've been having conversations with Shaun through the weeks too. And I personally have a tendency when I get kind of stuck in my head, it feels like, like to Rossina's point, I'm too full and I'm dwelling in it, I like to move in my body. That really helps me. I go out and garden, I do yoga, I put myself in an uncomfortable position doing yoga stretches, and I focus on breathing and relaxing, and it actually clears my mind. And I know that gardening and yoga isn't for everybody, but find those things that work for you, to move through your feelings and your thoughts, so you're not just kind of trapped in them, and you know, your feelings and your thoughts are controlling you as opposed to the other way around.
I like to say when we get trapped in our thoughts, and I know this is also, I'll keep it clean, right? I won't curse, but I call this a little itty bitty shoddy committee, because the little itty bitty shoddy committee gets busy, right? The chairman of the board starts telling you all of this little negative narrative that isn't working well for you in your life, and telling you all the negative things. You're not good enough, you're not worthy, you're not deserving, you're this or that, right? It's just a little negative narrative, right? That tries to convince you that you're not on the right path, when really, like, if you're in your heart space, which is connected to, you know, your core, your chakra space, and your you know, that hole in your core, if you allow yourself to be guided by that, you can get out of this headspace and get into your heart and your body and really feel what you need in order to be able to, like, to feel whole, to feel well, or to even desire to dare get to the things that will promote wellness and your well-being. And so get out and get away from the little itty bitty shoddy committee, because if they're trying to tell you what not to do and how you should be feeling, you got to get out of there. You got to run, and run quick.
Rossina, I really appreciate your phrases. I liked I liked what was it? Not highs and lows, but plateaus. I feel like these phrases are going to stick with me afterwards.
You know, that's the thing. So before becoming a therapist, I was communication major. And when you can get visualizations or quick little catchy phrases, it sticks with people. So you'll remember the IBSC, right? The itty bitty shoddy committee. And you'll remember the highs, lows, and plateaus. And you'll remember easy bake oven. This ain't no set it and forget it. It means you got to go do something.
Oh, I love that. Kristen Wade had a question. She said, I really appreciated your perspectives on not just dismantling the current narratives, but rewriting and amplifying new ones. Unfortunately, when people tie their identities to old narratives, anything new is seen as a threat and can be difficult to engage with. What are some ways you all have had success connecting with people who are resistant to hearing any new narratives?
In the therapy land, I'll hop in. You know, we like to say that we roll with the resistance, right? You don't try to change anybody, because change has to come from within. And so I think when you look at the cycle and everything that's happening in this world, you know, we'd like to say that there's a lot of need. But I think sometimes when we look at the word need, if people do the things that they need to do, they only engage them satisfactorily. And so I want people to want change. And I want people to believe that change is something that can happen, because if they want it, they go after it with a reckless abandon, and they don't yield in their efforts to go after it when they want it. And so as we're engaging this, it's encouraging people to go after the things that they want, because you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right? And so this isn't about forcing people to change a narrative, but when people aren't looking at things and we have change and we have that resistance, sometimes we also have to honor that resistance. And we have to honor that sometimes that resistance is coming from a very hurt place, and sometimes hurt people. And if you can recognize that sometimes that resistance might be coming from a very hurt space, you can give them a space and hold them up, and maybe give them the supports to encourage a process that maybe they've never even engaged before. And so I like to say it's a unique opportunity to just hold space, right? If you're able, because everybody doesn't have the emotional just capacity to be able to do that. So know your barometer, right? But just honor opposition. Opposition shows up to say, you know, something's happening for me on the inside and I don't necessarily know what it is. You know, hopefully, you know, with opposition, we can promote change, but I think sometimes we can't make people want it. All we can do is move forth and be the advocates and hold our lane and hold our posts in the way that we're doing it, each and every one of us, and encourage others to do their work, right? You know, if somebody's still hurting and somebody's still resisting, it's because they have work that's undone. They have ideas that have gone unchecked, and you can't go around and be in the check police, right? And tone policing people and changing people's narratives, right? Because you'll talk until you're blue in the face. If you hold space where they can do that critical reflection and take a look, maybe they might be encouraged to do that self-reflection and do some of that work, but you can't make people need it, because then it's only going to be satisfactory. You got to encourage them to desire it with everything that they have, because it's going to be the only thing that they'll be able to like go after in such a meaningful way that they won't be able to stop until they're satiated, right? And so it's promoting that space where they want it, right? They want it just as bad as they want something for themselves. And if they can want it for themselves, then they can want it for others too. So.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and chime in as well. Doing work around transforming masculinity, promoting healthy masculinity, understanding the dominant narrative of the stereotype, right? If we were to break down the masculine stereotype, the hyper toxic masculine narrative, we would have this whole like forced heterosexuality, fight, violence is a way to deal with conflict, hide your emotions, avoid anything that's been considered feminine or gay, right? So that dominant narrative is more about what we cannot be, right? And we're taught more not to be women and not to be gay than we are taught to be man or human, right? So understanding that that's a narrative, but working with masculine culture, I'm not going to step into masculine culture and just be like, here's this dominant narrative and this is really problematic, right? So I got exposed to an activity from an organization out of Washington, D.C. called Men Can Stop Rape. And I kind of altered it for Project PAVE's purposes, but it's really kind of a toxic activity on the surface. We call it the realest man activity. And we basically take two famous men, and I ask the group of guys to choose, to rank one man of the other, but I want them to choose a side of the room, go to this side of the room for that man and that side of the room for that man. And I don't want you to say anything about the man you don't choose. I want you to say why you chose this man right here, right? So what strikes me every time is that what comes out of why they chose this man and that man has everything to do with values. I rarely get the money, and I don't think I've got the women once yet. It's all about, you know, he does something to stand up for what he believes in, and he's open with these emotions. So what I hear masculinity calling for is humanization, and who we truly are is human. But again, back to Miss Rossina's point, that stereotype keeps us in our head. And if we think everybody is conforming to that same narrative, we're tribal peoples, right? We're going to conform to the group norm for safety. But when we start to open up and realize what's in our heart, then we realize that we're not stereotypical at all. That's just what's on the surface for our survival. So when we start to have those dialogues openly, then it gives permission for a new narrative to kind of, you know, be seeded. And the goal from that is for that work to continue, and exactly what Ms. Rossina just said.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to talk about my own experience with, you know, changing my mindset about things. So back home, well, let's just say when I came here, I met this man who was, so he was bisexual, he was atheist, he listened to heavy metal, he had tattoos. He was just all of the things that back home they will tell me run away from. It's like that's devil stuff, like get away from that. But my curious mind was like, okay, so tell me a little bit more about you, like what made you all of this thing that people told me to run away from. And so that really, like, I think it was also being a community in a place where people are allowed to be that way. Eventually it forces you to challenge your own mindset, you know? And I feel like one of the reasons why I was able to get there and to listen and to let the person be who they are and explain to me why it is that way is because eventually I accepted the fact that I was allowed to grow and to change my mind. And I think that in our society, it's like, okay, so if you believe in this thing, it has to be like that all the time. And if you change, you're a hypocrite. I'm like, no, because we're humans, we're allowed to change. Our perspective is allowed to change. And so I feel like if from the get-go, from, even when they're kids, when we promote, the value of change and of growth, we'll have human beings who will not just put themselves in one box and believe that this is the only way to be. So I think that one way for that is to really promote the value of growth and of change, and to allow people to experience things and to question their own beliefs. Because even if you take, like for me, religion, for example, and I don't like to go into details because I know it's a very sensitive subject, but sometimes you're not even allowed to question your own faith because people would think that you don't believe anymore. And I feel like it's really when you go through that you are grounded in your own belief, in your own faith, and you can be like, okay, I believe in this, not because society told me to believe in this, but because this is what I value. And it's through my growth that I came to this. And so yeah, that is it for me.
Okay, we're gonna do one more audience question, and I apologize if we weren't able to get to you. It's a really cool amount of engagement going on in the chat right now, and I really appreciate everyone just showing up and just being present as all of our guests are advocating for. And Femi, it's actually gonna be a personal one to you, so get ready. As an artist, what is your duty?
You're just hitting me with strong question. I don't have time to think. For me personally, it's all about expression and just being authentic and just showing things the way they are. You know, when I write, sometimes I'm not thinking about it. It's just what wants to come at that time. So even when people ask me, what is the meaning of this? I don't know. It's just what I felt at that moment. And this, I just wanted to let it come alive. And even with photography and with everything, it's really about it's like getting outside of myself in order to see what's going on within myself. So for me, being an artist is really, it's just being, and seeing what is going on within myself and with the world around me. Yeah. That was hard. Okay, bye.
I love that. You got to get out of yourself to get within yourself. That I couldn't have said it better. And we really do appreciate all the insight, everybody from the audience to Beverly, Rossina, Derek, Femi, Danny, all of the world. The universe is feeling these messages right now. And that being said, I want us to begin an exiting routine or ritual. So we're going to leave this place, accepting all the stories that have been shared. And we are also going to honor all the stories that have been shared, because I feel a lot of times we just kind of go in and out. It's just one text message and then boom, you got some more information. But I really want us to sit with everything that has been discussed. So that being said, let's get back into our seated position where our back is firm, our shoulders are relaxed. Everybody in the audience, Facebook Live, yeah, I'm talking about you. If you're comfortable, close your eyes. And just breathe at your own pace. Whatever it is that you're feeling, feel those feelings. Now we are going to take a deep breath in through our nose. On this first one, hold it in your stomach. Hold the air in your stomach. And release through the mouth. Breathe in through the nose. Nice and deep. And feel it in the chest-like area. Pay attention to your heart. What's it doing? And breathe out through the mouth. Let your shoulders sink a little deeper. Notice your breath in between. And our last breath will be very, very deep. As deep as you can get it. Breathe in through the nose. And feel it in your throat. Keep that air right there. And release. When you're comfortable, we'll give it about 2-3 seconds. You can open your eyes and revisit this moment.
Oh, but dear, your life isn't meant to be lived by others. You've been given a power that only you can use to make things much better and create a world of your own desire. So why live? Why survive when you can live? Why dream when it could be reality? Why give up when you can keep rising? Or stay on these soils when you could be soaring?
All right, everybody. We appreciate your time, and we hope that for all the folks who have viewed this today, we're going to have another one at 7 p.m. next Thursday. We're going to do this every Thursday until July 16th. This is Shaun Don the Truth, the Babytown production. We got Danny from Soul Stories Denver, and of course our amazing guests. So my last ask is, do any of the guests, do you have any events or anything that we should be aware of moving forward?
So the element, oh, go ahead.
No, it's all right, sis. I'll follow you.
All right. I was just going to say, the Therapist of Color Collaborative has been designated as the awesome benefactor of some different mindfulness, and there'll be a sip and paint type of activities that are donation based. And Healing Tree is actually not even here in Colorado. They are, I believe, out in Kentucky. They are a nonprofit, but they are using their platform to raise money in support of different Black Lives Matter initiatives and things like that, just kind of going throughout. So they're using their platform to raise money, and basically the money that they are raising throughout the different events. So every Sunday they have an event hosted on their website. And on the 18th of July, there'll be a sip and paint with all proceeds coming to the Therapist of Color Collaborative that will provide no-cost mental health sessions to Black, Indigenous persons of color needing services who aren't able to access services otherwise. And so those will be on the Element of Discovery Facebook page. And so if you're not on our Facebook page, please go to the page, like it. I'll be posting those things in the stories of Instagram as well. So that way, if you see them, please attend them. Because again, the proceeds are benefiting others who don't have access to care, but want access to care. And we want to be able to provide that care. And so take a look at those.
Well, I'll jump in right after Sister Rossina to say that those of you that want vegetables, please come and see me. I'm not going to do farmers markets this year because of COVID, but I am going to do 3 farm stands, and we'll begin in July. But I will post on like my Facebook and Instagram outlets what the schedule is. But just FYI, the first location will be Alchemy Ritual Goods, which is 25th and Champa on Sundays. We will be, and then on Wednesdays, we will be in the Cole neighborhood at 36 and Humboldt. That's where one of my farming sites is. And then on Fridays, we will be at the Dahlia campus on the 35th end of the campus, which is not where the parking lot is, but on the 35th, the north side of the campus. And on Friday afternoons, we'll set up on the sidewalk over there doing farm stands. So Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, farm stands beginning in mid-July.
I wanted to ask if maybe at the end, if Danny or Shaun, you could do like a post where you tag everyone. So if people need more information, they could come directly, because I feel like sometimes we hear stuff, but then we forget it later on. And I just wanted to add to that, that I do have some copies of my book. If anybody would like to get one, because I have it with me, I can just sign it. So when I become famous, you can say that you know me and all of that fun stuff. So I'll ask them to just put my name there. And so if anybody wants it, they can just send me a message and then we'll just figure the rest out. Voila.
Got anything, Derek?
No events that I would mention, but I'll just say this. It was such a blessing to get to know you all on here tonight. I learned so much from every single one of you, and your experiences validate something that I felt. I used to be an old football player back in the day, and I used to think that there was nothing funner or more invigorating than scoring touchdowns on a grass field. But my experience has led me to realize that serving other humans is so much more fulfilling than scoring touchdowns. When I get to help another human being out in a small way or vice versa, it's more gratifying than any of these worldly sort of carrots that have been put out in front of us. So I really challenge you who are listening to find a way to serve. It's really enriching to the heart. And I thank you all on this call for your service. Much love.
So can I say one quote? As you said that, Derek, it's one of my favorite quotes by Dr. Cornel West. And he says, "You can't lead the people if you don't love the people. And you can't save the people if you don't serve the people." And so that's it right there. That's what this is all about.
You got it, Shaun.
Okay. So that being said, this is the official. Make sure you guys check out the Facebook page. We're going to make sure that we have information featuring everybody that was here. That fire, that wisdom. And we will see you all next week. Stay tuned. Peace and love.